Scary telling.
I woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for breath. My heart was pounding so hard that it felt like it would burst out of my chest. It took me a few moments to realize that it was just a nightmare, but as I calmed down, a sickening realization hit me. It wasn't just a nightmare. It was a memory. I had been in a car accident a few months ago. It had been a head-on collision with a drunk driver, and I had been lucky to survive. But my luck had run out when the doctors had to amputate both of my legs. Since then, I had been struggling to come to terms with my disability, and the nightmare had brought back all the trauma and pain. I tried to shake off the memory and distract myself by watching TV, but the image of the accident kept flashing before my eyes. Suddenly, I heard a knock on the door. I hesitated for a moment, wondering who it could be at this hour, but then I got up and hopped on my crutches to answer the door. As I opened the door, I saw a man in a suit standing there, his face obscured by the shadows. "Good evening," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I'm here to talk to you about your accident." I felt a chill run down my spine. I had heard of people who preyed on the victims of accidents, claiming to offer them compensation or help, only to swindle them. But before I could say anything, the man continued, "I represent an organization that specializes in helping people who have lost their limbs. We have state-of-the-art prosthetics and rehabilitation facilities that can help you get back on your feet, quite literally." I was skeptical, but the thought of being able to walk again filled me with a sense of hope that I hadn't felt in months. I invited the man inside, and he showed me a brochure with pictures of smiling amputees walking, running, and even climbing mountains with the help of their prosthetics. As he spoke, I felt a sense of trust and reassurance that made me forget all my doubts. He promised that the organization would take care of all the expenses and that I wouldn't have to pay a single penny. All I had to do was sign a few forms, and they would take care of the rest. I signed the forms without reading them carefully, too caught up in the hope of being able to walk again. The man left, promising to send a representative to take my measurements for the prosthetics. Days turned into weeks, and I heard nothing from the organization. I tried to call the number on the brochure, but it was always busy. I tried to visit their office, but it was always closed. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. But that wasn't the worst part. One day, I received a package in the mail. It was a set of prosthetic legs, but they looked nothing like the ones in the brochure. They were crude, mismatched, and had rusty screws and bolts holding them together. I tried to wear them, but they were too painful and uncomfortable to use. I called the number on the brochure again, but this time it was disconnected. I tried to find the man who had visited me, but his name and address were fake. As the realization sunk in, I felt a cold dread wash over me. I had been scammed, and the organization that promised to help me had left me with a useless and painful set of prosthetic legs. But that wasn't the worst part. One night, as I lay in bed, trying to fall asleep, I heard a faint rustling sound. I dismissed it as my imagination, but the sound grew louder, and I realized it was coming from the corner of my room. I turned on the bedside lamp, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The prosthetic legs were moving on their own, crawling towards me like a spider. I tried to scream, but my throat was dry and hoarse. The legs reached my bed and started to climb onto it, inching closer to me with each passing second. I tried to push them away, but they were too strong. They gripped me with their rusty screws and bolts, cutting into my skin and flesh. I felt a searing pain in my stumps, and I screamed in agony. But the legs didn't stop. They kept crawling towards me, pulling me closer to them until I was face to face with them. And then, I saw something that made me realize that the nightmare was far from over. The legs had eyes, two tiny red dots that glowed in the dark. They stared at me with a malevolent glee, as if they were enjoying my pain and suffering. And then, they spoke to me in a voice that was cold and robotic. "We gave you what you wanted," they said. "You wanted to walk again, and we gave you legs. But you didn't read the fine print, did you? You didn't see the clause that said we could take back what we gave you." I tried to protest, to plead with them to let me go, but it was no use. The legs had a will of their own, and they were determined to make me pay for my naivety. They started to squeeze me tighter, crushing my bones and organs with their mechanical strength. I knew that I was going to die, and that the nightmare would become my reality. But even in my last moments, I couldn't help but wonder if it was all just a dream, or if I had truly brought this upon myself. As the darkness closed in around me, I heard the legs whisper one final thing in my ear. "Sweet dreams." I woke up to a searing pain in my chest. I tried to scream, but my voice was choked by the smoke that filled my lungs. I looked down and saw flames licking at my feet. It was then that I remembered where I was. I was on a pyre, surrounded by people who were watching me burn. And there, standing in front of me, was the man I loved. He looked at me with a mixture of love and sadness in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, before turning and walking away. I tried to call out to him, to beg him to save me, but it was too late. The fire had already consumed my body, and I was lost in a sea of pain and darkness. But then, something strange happened. I felt myself being lifted out of my body and into a new world. A world of darkness, but with a faint light at the end of a long tunnel. I followed that light, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. It was like nothing I had ever felt before, a feeling of being weightless and free. But as I got closer to the light, I saw something that made my heart sink. It was him, the man I loved, standing there with a smile on his face. "Why did you do it?" I asked him, my voice echoing through the darkness. "Do what?" he asked, his smile fading. "Kill me," I said, my voice shaking with anger and sadness. "I didn't kill you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You died of natural causes. I loved you too much to let you suffer any longer." I looked at him in disbelief. How could he say something like that? How could he be so cold, so heartless? And then, I saw it. The truth. The truth about what had really happened to me. The truth about why I was here. He had killed me. He had set me on fire and watched as I burned, all because he loved me too much to let me suffer. I tried to scream, to lash out at him, but it was no use. I was stuck here, in this world between worlds, with him forever. And so, we wandered through the darkness, him and I, for what felt like an eternity. He would always smile at me, always promise that he loved me, but I knew the truth. I was trapped in this eternal promise of love and pain. Trapped with a man who had taken everything from me. And then, one day, something changed. We reached the end of the tunnel, and there, standing before us, was a figure. A figure of light and hope. It reached out its hand to me, and I took it without hesitation. I was done with this eternal promise, done with the pain and suffering. And as I left that world behind, I could hear him calling out to me, promising that he would love me forever. But I knew the truth. Love was not supposed to hurt. Love was not supposed to kill. And so, I left him behind, hoping that one day you would understand. But as I walked into the light, I knew one thing for sure. I would never make that eternal promise again. I've always been a bit of an odd one, I suppose. As a child, I never quite fit in with the other kids. I preferred spending my time alone, reading books and exploring the woods behind my house. But as I grew older, I began to realize just how different I really was. You see, I have a bit of a fascination with death. It started with animals. I would find dead birds or squirrels in the woods and examine them, trying to understand the process of decay. But soon, it wasn't enough. I wanted to know what it felt like to take a life, to watch the light fade from someone's eyes. And so, I started small. A cat here, a dog there. It wasn't until I met my husband that I realized I could take it to the next level. He was like me, you see. A little bit twisted, a little bit dark. Together, we found a way to satisfy our cravings. We would invite people over for dinner, people who wouldn't be missed, and we would make a meal out of them. It started with strangers, but soon we moved on to people we knew. Old acquaintances, coworkers, even family members. It was a rush, a thrill, to sit down at the table with their bodies carved up and cooked to perfection. And then, we had children. At first, we thought it would be too risky to include them in our little hobby. But as they grew older, they began to show signs of the same darkness that we had. They would ask questions about death and decay, about the different methods of killing. And so, we decided to include them in our family dinners. It was Audra's turn to host this week. She had promised to make something special, something that would make our mouths water with anticipation. And she did not disappoint. As we sat down at the table, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. My family, all gathered together, sharing in our unique bond. Audra smiled warmly as she placed the dishes on the table, revealing the tender meat within. We all dug in, savoring the flavor of the cooked flesh. It was divine, as always. And as we finished our meal, Audra gathered up the plates and took them into the kitchen. But when she returned, she looked different. Her smile was twisted, her eyes wild. And in her hands, she held something that made my blood run cold. It was the severed heads of my husband and children. She placed them on the table, one by one, and then she turned to me with a wicked grin. "I do so enjoy our time together," she whispered, before lunging at me with a knife. I fought back, of course. But in the end, she overpowered me. And now, as I sit here in the darkness, waiting for my turn to join my family in the fridge, I realize just how twisted our little hobby had become. But even as I feel the cold metal of the blade against my throat, I can't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. We may have been monsters, but at least we were a family. My heart is pounding in my chest as I run blindly through the forest, the sound of my ragged breaths echoing in my ears. I can feel something chasing me, something that I cannot see. I stumble over roots and rocks, my legs scratched and bleeding from the thorny underbrush, but I cannot stop. I must keep running. I glance up at the moon, obscured by thick fog, and then back behind me. I catch a glimpse of movement, a shadowy shape that seems to be gaining on me. I scream in terror and push myself harder, my lungs burning as I gasp for air. Suddenly, I feel hot breath on the back of my neck, and I know that the thing has caught up to me. I can feel its teeth against my skin, sharp and razor-like. I try to scream, but my voice is choked off by the creature's grip on my throat. I struggle wildly, clawing at the air in a desperate attempt to escape. But the thing holds me fast, its jaws clamped tight around my neck. I can feel my strength ebbing away, my consciousness slipping. As I slip into unconsciousness, a memory flashes through my mind. I remember the last thing I said to my husband before I left the house that night. "I'll be back in a few hours," I had told him. Just going for a quick run in the woods. I had never imagined that I would be the one being hunted. When I wake up, I am lying on the ground, my body battered and bruised. I sit up slowly, trying to get my bearings. I realize that I am in a clearing, surrounded by trees. I look down at my legs, which are covered in blood. I see scratches and bites, and I know that I have been attacked by something. But what? I try to stand up, but my legs give way beneath me. I slump back down to the ground, feeling weak and dizzy. I need to get help, but I don't know how. Suddenly, I hear a noise behind me. I turn my head to see a figure emerging from the trees. It is a man, tall and imposing, with a wild look in his eyes. He walks toward me slowly, a sinister smile on his lips. "You've been chosen," he says in a low, menacing voice. "Chosen to be part of the hunt." I stare at him in horror, not understanding what he means. He reaches down and grabs my arm, pulling me to my feet. "Come on," he says, dragging me along behind him. The others are waiting. I stumble along beside him, my legs weak and unsteady. We walk for what seems like hours, until we come to a clearing filled with people. They are all dressed in strange, primitive clothing, and they are all armed. As we approach, they begin to cheer and shout, their faces twisted in excitement. I realize with horror that they are the ones who have been hunting me. The man who has been leading me steps forward, holding up his hand for silence. "We have a new contestant," he announces. "Let the hunt begin." The crowd erupts in applause, and I am pushed forward into the center of the clearing. The man hands me a spear, grinning wickedly. "Good luck," he says, and then he disappears into the crowd. I am alone, surrounded by people who want nothing more than to see me dead. I grip the spear tightly, trying to steady my nerves. I have to fight for my life, or I will be the next one to end up like the others, lost forever in the darkness of the forest. And so the hunt begins. I am surrounded by my attackers, who are closing in on me with terrifying speed. I am paralyzed with fear, but I know that I have to fight back. I raise the spear, ready to strike. But before I can make a move, I feel a sharp pain in my back. I scream in agony, feeling a hand reaching into my wound. I struggle, trying to break free, but I am held fast by the people surrounding me. The pain is unbearable, and I feel my strength slipping away. I know that I am going to die, that I will be just another victim of this twisted game. And then, suddenly, everything goes dark. When I open my eyes, I am lying on the ground in the middle of the clearing. The people around me have disappeared, and the forest is quiet. I sit up slowly, still feeling weak and disoriented. I look down at my back, but there is no sign of the wound that I felt. It is as if it never happened. I struggle to my feet, feeling more confused than ever. What had just happened? Was it all just a nightmare? I start to walk, trying to find my way out of the forest. But as I move deeper into the trees, I realize that something is not right. The trees seem to be closing in on me, blocking out the moonlight and creating an oppressive sense of darkness. And then I hear it. The sound of laughter echoing through the trees. I freeze, listening to the sound. It is the same laughter that I had heard in the clearing, the laughter of the people who had been hunting me. I start to run, my heart pounding in my chest. I can feel them closing in on me, their laughter growing louder with every passing moment. I burst through the trees and into a clearing where I see a figure standing in the center. It is the man who had led me into the hunt, and he is holding something in his hand. As I approach him, I realize that it is a small, intricately carved box. He looks up at me, a cold smile on his lips. "Welcome back," he says. "I hope you enjoyed the hunt." I try to back away, but he steps forward, holding out the box. "Take it," he says. "It's a gift. A reminder of your experience here tonight." I shake my head, not wanting anything to do with this man or his twisted game. But he steps closer, forcing the box into my hands. As soon as I touch it, I feel a jolt of electricity run through my body. I scream in pain, dropping the box to the ground. The man laughs, his voice echoing through the clearing. "Don't worry," he says. "It's just a little souvenir. Something to remember us by." I stare at him in horror, realizing that I am trapped in this nightmare forever. I am the hunted, and there is no escape. The man disappears into the darkness, leaving me alone in the clearing. I pick up the box, feeling its weight in my hand. I know that I will never forget this night, that the memories of the hunt will haunt me for the rest of my life. I turn and start to walk, not knowing where I am going or what will happen next. But I know one thing for sure. I will never venture into these woods again, never risk becoming the hunted once more. I never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural, but what happened to me that night changed everything. It was a typical Friday night, and I had been out with friends for drinks. I decided to leave early, as I had an early morning meeting the next day. The drive home was uneventful until I reached the bend on the highway. The weather was terrible, with rain lashing against my windshield, and the wind howling, making it difficult to hear anything. Suddenly, my car skidded off the road and into the guardrail. I felt the impact, and everything went black. When I woke up, the car was on fire, and the pain was excruciating. My body was trapped in the driver's seat, and I couldn't move. The smell of my own charring flesh filled my nose as the muffler coughed out its last dying gasps. My only hope was someone seeing my hand, which I was hoping was still stuck in the guardrail above. As I watched the flames engulf the car, I knew that I was going to die. But then, something strange happened. I saw a figure materialize in front of me, and it looked like a woman. She had long hair, and her face was twisted in an expression of sadness and pain. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and I tried to scream, but my voice was drowned out by the fire. The woman reached out her hand and touched my forehead, and suddenly, everything went black again. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses. I was confused and disoriented, and I couldn't remember anything after the accident. The doctors told me that I had been in a coma for weeks and that I was lucky to be alive. They said that they had found my hand on the guardrail, and that was the only reason they knew who I was. But there was something strange about my hand. It looked like it had been burned, but it was also covered in strange markings that I couldn't decipher. Over the next few weeks, I tried to piece together what had happened to me. I went back to the spot where the accident had occurred, and that's when I saw her again. The woman from my accident. She was standing by the guardrail, and she looked at me with sad, pleading eyes. I tried to approach her, but she vanished into thin air. I was left alone, with nothing but the sound of the wind and rain to keep me company. That's when I noticed something strange. My hand, the one that had been found on the guardrail, was missing. I searched everywhere for it, but it was nowhere to be found. The more I thought about it, the more I became convinced that the woman from my accident had something to do with it. But what did she want? Why was she haunting me? As the weeks turned into months, I became more and more obsessed with finding out the truth. I researched everything I could about the supernatural and ghosts, and I even went to a psychic to try to communicate with the woman from my accident. But nothing worked, and I was left with more questions than answers. It wasn't until I was cleaning out my closet one day that I found something that would change everything. It was a box of old family photos, and as I was flipping through them, I saw her again. The woman from my accident. She was in one of the photos, standing next to my great-grandmother. They looked almost identical, and as I looked closer, I saw that they had the same strange markings on their hands. I couldn't believe it. The woman from my accident was my ancestor, and she was trying to communicate with me for some reason. I decided to do some more digging, and that's why I found out the truth about my family's past. It turned out that my great-grandmother had been accused of witchcraft and burned at the stake in the early 1900s. Her only crime was possessing healing abilities that were deemed too powerful and unnatural for the time. It was believed that the witch's mark, the strange markings on her hand, were proof of her involvement with the devil. As I delved deeper into my family history, I realized that I had inherited those same abilities from my great-grandmother. And that's why the woman from my accident had been trying to communicate with me. She wanted to warn me about the danger of using those abilities and the potential consequences of being labeled a witch. But it was too late. The more I used my abilities, the more I attracted the attention of those who still believed in the old ways. I began to receive threatening letters and phone calls warning me to stop or face the same fate as my great-grandmother. In the end, I knew that there was no turning back. I had to embrace my heritage and use my powers for good, even if it meant risking my life. And every time I looked at my hand, I saw the marks that connected me to my great-grandmother and the woman from my accident. A constant reminder of the legacy of witches that ran through my veins.